Good day to everyone. I am Jim Diott, and I am the Executive Director of the University of California, San Diego, Rady School of Management's Master of Professional Accountancy program. I would like to welcome you to our annual Master of Professional Accountancy Capstone Conference. This year, we are taking a deep dive into how boards, corporate, as well as policy leaders can work together to help create resilient enterprises and communities today. COVID has been a challenge for all of us. After over a year of this challenge, it is clear that some businesses have benefited where others have been severely hurt by the pandemic. We learned of the importance of digital transformation. How you define it doesn't really matter, but what we do know about it is this: those that adopted it, those that have been able to utilize the new technologies, were able to survive, whereas others, the outcome was not good. At the University of California, we've had access to these tools that have allowed us to get to know each other, to study together, to grow together, and to support each other along with colleagues from around the world. Others, unfortunately, did not have that same set of tools. Today, you will hear from all of our graduate degree candidates of the Rady MPAc class of 2021. It is such a shame that you will not have the opportunity to engage with them directly today. Please let me assure you that this is a committed and a very talented group of professionals with their next stop arriving into our profession tomorrow. We challenged our students earlier this year to help create a topic that they wish to address for their capstones. The only thing we really asked was, one is make sure that the topic would be interesting to that of boards, and number two, just maybe of interest to the press. Our students easily identified matters that should be on the agenda of all boards, whether private enterprise or public. The second demand, matters that would be covered in the press. They exceptionally achieved this as well. Each and every one of our topics today, our students have been focusing on matters that are board worthy, board consideration, that is covered by the global press. I will do my best to highlight a sampling or two on recent coverage as I introduce each of the panels. Lastly, none of this was possible without the support of some outstanding senior leaders from globally recognized firms, including EY, Walmart, RSR Partners, Silvergate Bank, Moss Adams, Oakland Standard, Citibank, and from the faculty of the Rady School of Management. You provided the comfort to our students that they were taking on complex issues that were board relevant. You also inspired our students to continue to work and improve their presentations and create a memorable experience for themselves. As this is our sixth and final presentation, as a program director, as an executive director to this program, to have this group of wonderful students finish out a year in week 29, this strong, I've never seen anything like this. This is one of the most talented group of young colleagues I've ever had the opportunity to serve and work with. And I cannot tell you how pleased I am with the efforts that they've provided our school this past year. My recommendation to you in the audience is sit back, close out your other applications, put on some high quality headphones, and enjoy the presentation that will follow. As I said earlier, this is session number 6, our final session of the day. This program will be on creating greater enterprise resilience by embracing sustainability reporting. A few months ago, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal that noted there is 5.5 trillion recognized assets in the US on corporate books today. These intangibles can evaporate overnight through an impairment charge. Never has the case been made to better understand, to better focus on what sustainability is all about. Today's press, Wall Street Journal this morning, bank CEOs take heat on Capitol Hill. The chief executives of the 6th largest US bank drew fire from both Republican and Democrats at Senate hearings yesterday that highlighted the challenges facing corporate leaders seeking to navigate a partisan strife over hot button issues that include voting rules, climate change, executive compensation, and racial justice, all components in ESG. This group is a special group of young colleagues. I've challenged them even a little bit more with a focus on the S. I think a number of people here today in the audience is getting a good feel what the E is all about, but the S is a little bit more difficult. It goes to the heart of where do companies play in supporting society? And so I've asked them to take on S. Our panel will explore the issues and challenges that boards are facing in creating these resilient enterprises. They're going to look at the issues of how do you identify stakeholders, and more importantly, how to both engage and come to an agreement on how to create value with those stakeholders. Next slide, please. I am so delighted to bring up to our virtual stage Lester Shen, who will introduce not only herself, but her colleagues on this final program. Lester, the stage is yours.
Thank you, dear Professor James. Dear ladies and gentlemen here, good afternoon. We are thrilled to see you here today. We are Group 2 Innovation Station. There are 6 members in our group. All of us, the students from UCSD Master of Professional Accountancy program, and we will graduate in June. I'm the Captain Lester Chen and want to work in Shanghai in China in the future. Yu is our project manager and we are working in San Diego post-graduation. Yasmin is our secretary and will join the RSM in Los Angeles department. Evelyn is the leader on production and will work in San Diego as well. Brianna is our lead speaker and will join in the EY San Diego. Ruijie is our team quality leader and will work in China as well. It's our honor to show you our discoveries with you. Now let's begin our journey to global ESG developments. Our key focus will be the measurement and implementation of ESG with global view. ESG has been raising much debates worldwide this year. Just several days before, a research on EU reporting displayed that directors reluctant to consider stakeholders with long-term strategy thinking. Meanwhile, the National Association of Corporate Directors praised the ESG and climate change as the next important topics during pandemic recovery. SEC also values ESG and posts many researchers to explore the measurement and implementation of ESG. So is ESG appropriate to measure companies' long-term sustainability? Is this indeed a matter? If so, how could we implement ESG in our internal control and operation? According to these questions, we are going to unfold our topic in these 6 parts. At first, we will introduce the definition and importance of ESG. Then we will use South Africa as an example to explore measurement of ESG. After that, implementation of ESG in South Africa, the US and China will be compared. Finally, we will look ahead for the future trade of ESG and provide you with takeaways and key suggestions. First and foremost, let's welcome Evan to introduce the concept and importance of ESG for you.
Thank you, Lester. Before I start to introduce ESG, can anyone guess which company experienced protest and employee strike during the COVID-19 period? The correct answer is Amazon. In this picture, there's a man protesting Amazon at the fulfillment center, and he got fired after leading the protest of corporation's coronavirus standards in New York City. In the United States alone, an estimated 19,000 Amazon workers have contracted COVID-19, and at least 8 have died, prompting strikes at several warehouses across the US. While the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in mass business closures the world over, widespread national lockdowns have only amplified the growth and profits of the US tech giant. Meanwhile, the pandemic put Amazon's workers under huge pressure. At the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, when extra workers in the warehouse meant that social distancing was impossible, staff were working longer hours to meet surging demand, and workers were not provided with protective personal equipment like face masks. Does Amazon care about ESG? No, they don't. Besides exploit workers, Amazon also has other problems violating ESG concept. For example, unfair competition, disregarding environmental responsibilities, violating user privacy, and aggressive tax avoidance. What is worth mentioning here is that for years, it never produced a yearly corporate sustainability report, and it refused to release any emission data. So, what is ESG? ESG means environmental, social, and corporate governance. It refers to the three central factors in measuring the sustainability and the social impact of an investment in a company or business. It is used by investors to evaluate corporations and determine the future financial performance of the company. Here's a history of ESG. Environmental, social, and governance issues are a fairly new concept to companies and investors. The concept originated in 2001 after the launch of FTSE for Good, which is Financial Times Stock Exchange. It is index series with the objective for UK pension funds to take account of social, ethical, or environmental issues. They soon implemented environmental management criteria in 2002, human rights criteria in 2003, and supply chain labor standards in 2005. The FTSE for Good then introduced the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, which is PRI, in 2006 as a founding signatory. ESG issues were first mentioned in PRI report, consisting of the Freshfield report and Who Cares Wins. ESG criteria was, for the first time, required to be incorporated in the financial evaluations of companies. This effort was focused on further developing sustainable investments. This chart shows the rising of ESG investment. When PRI first issued, 63 investment companies composed of asset owners, asset managers, and service providers signed with $6.5 trillion in assets under management, which is AUM, incorporating ESG issues. As of June 2019, there are 2450 signatories representing over $80 trillion in AUM. The emphasis on ESG is increasingly growing as major institutional investors are making it clear that they expect the companies they hold to commit strongly to ESG criteria. Today, COVID-19 became a major turning point for ESG. Then, why ESG is so important? Because it helps to create a sustainable and a resilient business over time that takes into consideration risks not easily identified in a spreadsheet. There are a lot of stakeholders caring about this topic, both internal and external. The picture on the left shows some examples of internal and external stakeholders. To better illustrate, investors are increasingly considering ESG issues to help manage investment risks. Directors and boards need to begin applying ESG criteria, as shareholders will begin holding them accountable. There is a significant global trend towarding the adoption of ESG-related regulations, targeting institutional investors, corporate issuers, or both. The public is growing their awareness and concerns about some big companies and their ESG issues. Besides, right now there is no global measurement of ESG, even though the more regulators pick up ESG baton. The WEF, along with the Big Four accounting firm, are accelerating the ESG transformation through the establishment of a consensus set of standardized measurements to an organized framework for companies to report their results in a new stakeholder capitalism approach. The difficulty here for ESG criteria is how to establish a form of consistent and transparent reporting for financial and non-financial metrics that would be consistent within different industries.
Thank you, Evelyn. Now that ESG is meaningful to stakeholders, then how could we know whether a company indeed did a good job? Yasmin and Brianna, could you introduce the measurement of ESG for us?
Thank you, Lester. Now that ESG has been introduced and why it's so important, it's now time to see how ESG can be measured. On this slide, you can see that many firms and organizations have ESG measurement systems. Some of the most popular are Bloomberg, Sustainalytics, CDP, DJSI, and FTSE Russell. But first, I will focus on the MSCI ESG rating system. The MSCI ESG rating system is a measurement of a company's resilience to long-term industry material ESG risk, as well as a company's long-term commitment to ESG. MSCI scores companies that it rates on each key issue from 0 to 10, with 0 indicating virtually no exposure and 10 representing a very high exposure to a particular ESG risk or opportunity. MSCI also evaluates companies on exposure to controversial business activities, such as smoking or gambling. Data that is used to create these scores are obtained from various sources, such as corporate filings, financial statements, and press releases. Third-party media is also used, such as academic, regulatory, and government sources. The framework on the left showcases how scores are calculated. First, the raw data is used to create exposure and management scores, are key metric deductions. These scores and deductions will create key issue scores, which will then add up to E, S, and G pillar scores. All 3 pillar scores are then combined to come up with a final adjusted score. Finally, the final adjusted industry score will fall under 3 rating categories: leader, average, and laggard. If you focus on the graphic on the right, according to MSCI, a leader, which is rated AAA or AA, indicates the company is leading in its industry in managing the most significant ESG risk and opportunities. Average companies are described by a mixed or unexceptional track record of managing ESG risk and opportunities related to its peers, while a laggard company trails its industry based on its high exposure and failure to manage significant ESG risk. And this slide is a breakdown of the ESG pillar scores and its key issues. Some key issues of the social pillar are labor management, community relations, and human capital development. These key issues can change based on a company's industry. So here's an example of an ESCI rating report of Amazon in 2019. As discussed previously, fair treatment of workers is an important issue that Amazon is facing. Here's another Amazon ESG score by Yahoo Finance. Their ESG score was ranked medium. We believe a top global company like Amazon has the ability, resources, and market share to raise its score. So now here are a few graphs from the South Africa ESG Leaders Index. The graph on the left shows the annual performance of companies that are ESG leaders compared to other South African companies that have not implemented ESG practices yet. If you start from 2008 and go through the years, you can see for the most part that ESG leader companies have done better than other South African companies. The chart on the right shows the gross returns of ESG leader companies compared to other South African companies. As you can see again, the South African ESG leaders companies are excelling. So as a group, we would like to highlight a South African company that does really well with ESG measurement. ShopRite Holdings is Africa's largest food retailer. One way that ShopRite measures its ESG progress is through a broad-based Black economic empowerment scorecard. This scorecard is used to measure a company's efforts in empowering Black South Africans. For example, giving back to the community, employing Black South Africans, and supporting Black businesses. These efforts will be discussed more in detail later in our presentation. The scorecard is measured and weighed under 5 elements: ownership, which is worth 25 points, management control, which is worth 19 points, skills development, which is worth 25 points, enterprise and supplier development, which is worth 40 points, and finally, social economic development, which is worth 5 points. ShopRite's scorecard is included in its 2020 sustainability report. ShopRite's BEE score has improved throughout the years from a score of 59.40 to 65.85 out of a total score of 109 points. From 2018 to 2019, ShopRite has moved from a level 8 contributor to a level 7 contributor, which has increased ShopRite's recognition level from 10 to 50%. ShopRite's BEE recognition level is currently rated as satisfactory, so there's a lot of room for growth and improvement. Lucrative business opportunities are provided to companies with high BEE scores. Because of BEE measurements, ShopRite is able to increase its support of Black-owned and Black women-owned suppliers, as well as hire Black unemployed youth. I will pass it on to Yasmin now to speak about ESG measurement in the United States and China.
Thank you so much, Brianna. So for the United States, ESG reporting is not a requirement. However, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is also known as SASB, has developed a comprehensive list of 77 industry-specific standards regarding financially material factors that could affect the financial condition or operating performance of a company. So the framework on the left is used to create these standards, and these standards cover issues that relate to the following 5 dimensions of sustainability: environment, social, human capital, business model and innovation, and leadership and governance. SASB also provides an interactive materiality map so companies can discover their most relevant ESG issues via their industry. And the materiality map helps identify which issues are most pertinent to business and stakeholders. So now to switch gears for the ESG in China, there are a few things we wanted to mention. So foreign investors are putting pressure on Chinese companies, and there are also fairly weak disclosures compared to the Western markets. And large companies have more resources to issue ESG reports compared to the smaller companies. And then lastly, there's no uniform ESG measurement standard in China. So different institutions have different ratings, and this makes sense because different industries cannot all have ratings based on the same measurements. However, this also makes it a bit difficult to make comparisons. So the chart on the right is from Sintao Green Finance in China, and it goes through the E, S, and G and shows a few examples of what companies look at when they're rating their ESG. So for instance, under social, it goes through employee, supply chain, community, product, philanthropy, and social controversies. Some of the things they look at under these categories is community communication and responsible supply chain management. So this is another figure from Sintao Green Finance, and it shows the steps that Chinese companies take to measure ESG. So the first step is data collection. So things like annual reports and government information. And then the second step is data analysis. So objective and subjective data. And then the third step is ESG rating, which is the weighted computation and ratings. And finally, the last step is ESG profile. And so this is ESG reports, scores, and controversies. And we wanted to show you 2 other charts showing social and governance disclosure. These are from research done by the UNEP Finance Initiative, the Principles for Responsible Investment, the Sintao Green Finance, and the UK-China Pact. So the graph on the left shows the disclosure rates on social indicators by CSI 300 companies. So the topic that has the lowest disclosure rate is freedom of association, and that's at 3.9%. And then the highest is anti-discrimination, which is at 42.3%. And then the average disclosure rate for social indicators is 28.9%. And then the graph on the right shows disclosure rates on corporate governance by CSI 300 companies. And so the topic with the lowest disclosure rate is commitment to sustainable development, which is only at 5.8%. And the highest rate is diversity of board of directors, which is 97.6%. And so the average disclosure for corporate governance is at 66.3%. So here's another figure on the reporting of ESG in China. So this figure shows companies that are reporting and not reporting on ESG matters in China. So the green shows companies that have reported on ESG factors, and the orange line shows companies that have not reported on their ESG. So they do this for different industries such as healthcare, energy, materials. And so as you can see, there's still a lot of orange lines, so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to increase their reporting. And so here we wanted to identify some main challenges in ESG measurement. So the first is a limited understanding of ESG issues, and there's a bit of a lack of awareness around the topic. The second is a lack of company culture and incentive around ESG. So if companies had certain ESG goals, it would be beneficial to incentivize managers in order to reach their ESG goals. And it is important for companies and managers as a whole to understand the issue and know the importance around ESG goals. And not all companies are enforcing this or having conversations around ESG. And then the third is a lack of comparable historical ESG data, which makes it difficult for companies to report. And then lastly, the fourth is an inability to form global uniform standards. So of course, it's difficult for the world to have the same measurement standards because there are different types of companies, different governments, and different social factors. So this makes it a lot harder to report and make comparisons. And then we wanted to briefly reiterate some takeaways from South Africa. So South Africa has uniform and precise measures, and a full integrated ESG reporting is a requirement for stock exchange listing. And so this is something that the US and China should be working towards. And in addition, the ESG reporting is included in financial statements, and it is government enforcement. And then lastly, the companies in South Africa are involved in their community and partnering with small businesses in their community as suppliers. So they're trying to train their future workforce and provide them education so that when the youth gets older, they can actually work for their company. And South Africa is doing a great job with the diversity and inclusion. So they're trying to add more women in their workforce and create gender equality. So overall, they're doing a lot to enforce ESG and encourage companies to report on it.
Thank you, Yasmin, Brianna. So why South Africa will perform well on implementation of ESG? Yu, could you introduce how the ESG is developed in South Africa?
Sure, happy to share my findings. So what is the origin of ESG and king codes in South Africa? 1994 is a key year. At that year, South Africa ended the apartheid era and elected Nelson Mandela as the president. Afterwards, the numbers of South African businesses had grown rapidly, and owners could hold control over their companies. That is a transition from political to private sector. However, there was nothing written down to guide these businesses or explain how a board should treat stakeholders other than shareholders. Therefore, the Institute of Directors in South Africa asked Marvin King, who is a corporate lawyer and former High Court judge, to chair a committee to deal with these issues. And in the same year, the first corporate governance code for South Africa, that is King 1, was published. 3 King reports were issued in 1994, 2002, and 2009, and a 4th revision King 4 in 2016. In 2013, Integrated Reporting Framework was published because of the King 3. We'll talk about it in the later slides. As you can see in this timeline, King reports have continued revising to combine new concepts. This is a continuing process. Because new version of the King report would replace the old one, and here we'll just focus on King 4's contents. Different from SOX, the King Code is not legislative. Although the code is not enforced through legislation, many principles are now embodied as law in the Companies Act of South Africa. Moreover, compliance with the King IV is now a requirement for companies listed on Johannesburg Stock Exchange and a voluntary code for unlisted companies like privately held enterprises or non-for-profit organizations. In addition, it is a stakeholder inclusive approach. Under the King Codes, a corporate board should consider the needs, interests, and expectations of all material stakeholders in the best long-term interests of their organization. From King III to King IV, there is a move from apply or explain to apply and explain. In other words, under King III, if you choose not to apply certain rules, you just needed to explain why. But under King IV, you need to explain applicability of all rules, whether adopted or not, and explain your understanding and applicability of the rule. And there are 4 principles of King IV. The first one is ethical culture. The company should lead ethically and effectively, support its ethical culture, ensure that the organization is seen to be a responsible corporate citizen. The second one is performance and value creation. The company should appreciate that strategy, risk, performance, and sustainability are inseparable, and ensure that the reports issued by the organization enable stakeholders to make informed decisions. The third one is effective control. The company should design, perform, and monitor controls to make them act adequately and effectively. The fourth one, the last one, is trust, good reputation, and legitimacy. The company should balance material stakeholders in the best interest of the organization over time and be a responsible institutional investor. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, integrated reporting plays another important role in implementing the King Code. Integrated reporting was first stated in the King III. King III did not, however, elaborate on how this report should be structured or the content it should be contained. This led to the birth of the Integrated Reporting Committee of South Africa. The IRC developed a framework for an integrated report in 2013. And as the principles of King IV were included in the listing requirements of the JSE, listed companies were also required to prepare an integrated report. And in the report, companies should identify, measure, balance the 6 capitals of a company, that is financial, manufactured, intellectual, human, natural, social, and relationship. Today, South African organizations follow the best practice guidance in corporate governance. However, these companies are still facing some issues. The first one is foreign direct investment. There are more than 600 American companies invested in South Africa, contributing an estimated 10% of the GDP and employing more than 100,000 South Africans. However, generally, there are few restrictions on these foreign direct investments. Companies invested in South Africa do not require to apply King IV and prepare integrated reports. Yet, there are some restrictions on foreign investors in specific sectors, such as telecommunications, banking, defense, and mining. Another regulation they need to follow is BEE, Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment. It encourages companies to integrate Black people into the workspace, support Black businesses, and give back what they earned into Black communities. Companies are measured against the BEE scorecard to determine their BEE score and rating. But why does a company need this rating? First, certain industries require the company to keep certain BEE level in order to receive and maintain the license. Second, if companies get higher rating, they can claim on a BEE certificate that offers them greater chances to obtain government contracts. Third, companies will score better if they deal with suppliers with higher BEE ratings. Therefore, it becomes one consideration while having transactions. In the previous slides, we recognized how governance and measurement are so important. And here, we also can see that South Africa is doing a great job at helping their communities, showing that they put efforts not only into E and G, but also into their society. The second one is political interference. In April 2016, after an accusation emerged that the Gupta family had been involved in high-level political manipulation and money laundering, all major South Africa banks dropped the family's business accounts. These banks viewed this family as a bad thing to the country and did not want to have any relationships with it because of under extensive political pressure from the ANC, Cabinet Minister, and Oak Bay Investment. One of the banks, Standard Banks, filed an affidavit in the High Court appealing for protection. For me, this is the first time I had ever seen a company asked for political protection against the government.
Thank you, Yu. Then I will compare ESG in South Africa with that in the US and in China. The King Code and the BEE indeed profoundly affect the implementation of ESG in South Africa. So is there anything act as King Code in the US? The disclosure of ESG is not mandatory in the US, but some institutions and standards indeed provides guidance for companies, such as SSB, TCFD, GRI, and some principles issued by SEC. My teammate Yasmin has introduced the SASB before, so I will briefly talk about other important principles. TCFD, which is Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, is issued by the Financial Stability Board. According to the status report posted by TCFD, averagely 37% of companies' disclosure information aligned with TCFD recommended disclosures. Global Reporting Initiative assessed materiality based on impacts made by issues on the economy, environment, and society. The GRI standard is the only sustainability reporting framework that can demonstrate widespread global adoption. 37 of the G250 and 67% of N100 now use GRI during their disclosure. Apart from all these standards, the SEC's Rule 40A regarding shareholder proposal for public company involves ESG topics. In 2010, SEC issues guidance on disclosure on climate change. It is beneficial for companies to have so many rules to choose from for their disclosure, but it may not be a good news for investors. If different companies apply different standards in their disclosures, then the comparability of this information will be reduced. Without a unified and widely applied standards as the King Code did, it will be difficult to make decisions based on sustainability. When it comes to China, 3 kinds of listed companies are required to issue CSR report annually since 2008. These 3 kinds of companies are companies in Shanghai Stock Exchange Corporate Governance Index, companies issuing overseas listed foreign shares, and companies relevant to banking and finance. In 2009, the Shanghai Stock Exchange also published the samples and format for CSR reports. But as you notice, the required report is CSR report instead of ESG report. So what's the difference between CSR and ESG? Generally speaking, ESG is a relatively higher level of disclosure standards compared to CSR, since the concept and the requirements of ESG is clear and involve more qualitative factors. While CSR aims to make a business accountable, ESG criteria make its effect measurable. Moreover, ESG policies are criteria-led and require that they be embedded in the core of a business strategy, while the CSR report may just be the side product describing the company's advantages on what it is doing well. They are highly likely to avoid talking about areas where it may be failing in a CSR report. Here I want to use China National Petroleum Corporation as an example. These pictures are from their ESG report issued in 2019 and the CSR report issued in 2018. Well, don't be panicked. I know the pages seems cubism. I just want to show how obvious it is that the ESG report is more concrete and specific than the CSR report. Here are one of the quotations from these two reports. In the ESG report, the CNPC listed detailed procedures for their target and the specific achievement they already obtained. Under the same subtitle, the disclosure from ESG report is definitely more detailed, comprehensive, and specific compared to the CSR report. Also, the ESG report asks for more quantitative disclosure. If I ask you to have a guess which one of these two pictures is from an ESG report and which one is from a CSR report, I think definitely you will not give out wrong answers. The right one is from an ESG report. It's pretty obvious, right? While the CSR report will involve more descriptive and qualitative content, the ESG report will provide more statistics and quantitative information. After comparison, we can see that the US lacks unified standards and mandatory enforcement, while China is still on its way from CSR to ESG. So what are the obstacles exist if the US and China want to learn from South Africa's experience? Firstly, in the US, the structure of law, which is federal law plus state law, determines that company will be influenced more by the state law. However, the state law, according to corporation, varies from state to state. It will be hard to figure out a unified federal law on ESG disclosure and implementation, since tremendous interest parties will be involved. Different conditions in different states and regions should be taken into consideration. Secondly, comprehensiveness of disclosure should be taken into consideration. If China indeed wants to improve the quality of this disclosure, the disclosure principle for ESG reports should be explored. For instance, how the ESG is implemented in company strategy, the detailed goals, the procedures to achieve the goal, the risk and accountability, and so on should be included in the ESG reports. Thirdly, the current enforcement has not yet been enough to ensure the conduct of ESG. In the US, Tillman Act prohibits monetary contribution to federal candidates by companies and national chartered banks, but many companies will hide the outflow in other accounts. When it comes to China, those unlisted companies are required to issue CSR reports. Few law and regulation exist on monitor, control, accountability, and possible punishments. In 2030, some companies were only fined for 600 yuan for violating waste emission standards. Such a slight punishment definitely will not be a threat to companies not following the standards. So, are there any possible solutions to figure out these problems? These are some solutions probably could help. For the US, they could involve more ESG factors in the federal law and choose or combine existing standards. The transfer cost will be lower and will be more convenient for companies to have examples. According to different industries and companies, the standards could be a combination of general framework and detailed rules, or even maybe involve some industrial-related specific rules. When it comes to China, specific requirements on disclosure should be posted to improve the quality of report from CSR to ESG. Important index could be selected to be involved in the updated rules. As to the enforcement, both the US and China could build a persistent system to monitor market and company, supervise the implementation of rules, and conduct appropriate punishment if any violation happens. So what could companies do to face the possible change in the future? Well, it's definitely a complex and difficult task to implement ESG in its internal control, but some tips may help. Firstly, when it comes to structure, a sustainability committee could be set up, or the responsibility of E, S, and G could be split up and allocated to different departments. A clear guidance or handbook could make the responsibility and the relevant staff accountable. Secondly, the company could design a monitor and control system to obtain statistics on ESG performance management. The measurable statistics could show where the key flaws are. With a clear direction, company could continually improve its sustainability. Finally, a subtle point, the ESG could be involved in the core control of the company. Even a hard board could provide the procedures to conduct ESG responsibility only when the employees indeed recognize the importance of ESG and willing to conduct it in their action with the ESG implemented in all dimensions of the option. With appropriate education, training, and recruitment of professional staff, the internal culture will be improved to conduct ESG responsibilities. Finally, Rady will predict the future of ESG worldwide for you.
Thank you, Lester. ESG has never been so popular around the world, and I will talk about some recent events. First is the impact of COVID-19. We can see the public awareness of ESG has been raised during the pandemic. For example, investors seem to have more interest in ESG industry. ESG funds are continuing to gain assets. This may benefit from digital transformation that companies need to meet new requirements under such a new normal, and this requires a better corporate governance. Another point is that the pandemic is accelerating global energy transition. During the outbreak, electricity demand dropped for a while due to economic shutdown, and this brought instability to oil and coal market. The global power capacity mix has already been shifting toward renewables, and this trend is accelerating. There are also many policies encouraging this trend, including federal and state tax credit in US, clean energy law in Europe, and large scale of renewable public subsidy in China. It is expected that by 2040, renewables will make up 45% of total energy source. For something happened recently, first is the Georgia voting. On March 25th, Georgia governor signed a new law in response to claims of voter fraud in the 2020 election, and it received criticism from many sources for it limits voters' access to voting. Big companies like Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola claimed the bill was unacceptable. I think this is a vivid example that how policies and social governance affect operation of the companies. We can see that this bill does not only influence voting, but also impacts local business environment, including companies' investment, strategy, and other interests. Another event is the Leaders Summit on Climate, ended on April 23rd. The summit brought together 40 world leaders in response of the climate crisis. It highlighted global cooperation on climate change. US announced that it would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The EU is accelerating its 2030 carbon reduction target, and China claimed to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. With global cooperation, we can move forward to a better future. The next point I want to mention is ESG disclosure. The SEC has been looking at measures to standardize ESG reporting. In May 2020, SEC endorsed a report outlining its recommendation regarding ESG disclosure policies. It would establish a uniform framework for related disclosures for public companies and provide investors with comparability. And in March of this year, acting SEC chairman declared that the SEC is taking steps to develop and implement a mandatory ESG disclosure framework. A request for comments sets out the following questions, including contents, range, character, responsibility, and many other issues. In the long term, it is clear that the SEC is developing a comprehensive ESG disclosure framework, and this act will urge public companies to prepare for such requirements. So based on the facts above, we can see that ESG is becoming a more and more popular topic around the world. At last, our group has come up with our major takeaways in ESG. From the perspective of companies, nowadays, stakeholders are requiring more from companies besides making profits. business elements, including strategy, risk, performance, and sustainability, are inseparable in companies' operation. And those who publish ESG report tend to have better performance. And from the perspective of regulation, the act of regulators play an important role in ESG, and these laws and regulations must be enforced to take effect. What is more, the ambiguity surrounding ESG rating agencies has motivated the SEC to begin creating a standard framework as well that would benefit both companies and investors. And CSR report is a precursor of ESG report. China is under its way to improve the quality of disclosure so that companies need to follow these requirements. Our group gave out the following suggestions. Companies should invest in monitor and control system to obtain statistics on ESG, and performance management should be established, including collection, disclosure, evaluation, and analysis. Public and government should recognize the key industrial and corporate risks on ESG and take actions in response of these risks. For companies in China, it is necessary to get prepared to embrace next stage of ESG. For US companies, they should be ready for intersection of standards requirements. Let's go back to the beginning. So what should Amazon do to improve their sustainability level? We have come up with 3 major points. First is Amazon needs to build a sustainability committee as soon as possible. This committee will be responsible for Amazon's sustainability issues and lead the transformation from the management level. Second is to establish a feedback system to hear from its customers and employees so that the company can figure out the key factors and make improvements. Third is that Amazon needs to follow SEC's guidelines to properly disclose their ESG issues. This will help to achieve a better governance and public supervision. With these measurements, Amazon will head towards a sustainable company. So this is all our presentation. Today, we looked at the concept of ESG, its importance, how to measure it, and its implementation worldwide. Finally, we gave our suggestions to the management. I hope this presentation can raise your interest in ESG and inspire us how to achieve company sustainability in a brand new angle. Thank you for your listening and I hope you enjoyed it. And special thanks to our professor, Jim Dian, for helping and guiding us in this project. It is an honor to work under your support in the past year. Thank you.
Ruji, thank you for that incredible wrap up for one of my really favorite topics of this conference. I think I've shared with you all that this is a new era of reporting that is coming, and it's something that's going to be developed over the remainder of your professional careers. You know, what you, Brianna, Yasmin, you, Lester, and Evelyn really have addressed today is something that's incredibly important, that companies now really need to sit down and take a hard look at all the elements that allow them to create value. And this is done with and through and support of and complementing of their stakeholders. And that stakeholder group has expanded considerably. Actually, I should say it's always been there, but it's even becoming more important today, particularly as these companies have largely balance sheets that consist of intangible assets. So really well done. You know, the real shame, I said it's a shame you're not getting a chance in the audience to meet our colleagues today. The real shame for me is not having the opportunity of sitting down over a dinner this evening with these colleagues and going over all of our topics, all of the things that were raised today. I think you'd find it to be an incredible conversation, you know, on all these topics, with the focus on how do corporations, how do communities create greater resiliency where they are. At this point in time, our webinar is now concluded. Our conference for 2021 is over as well. I want to thank those who have joined us today and hope everyone enjoyed not just this fantastic presentation, but all 6 of the presentations today that were done by the graduate candidates of our MPAc program 2021. We will be posting this webinar for on-demand replay shortly. If you're interested in the presentation materials, please reach out to us at Rady, and we will make arrangements to share the presentations with you. My final, on behalf of the students and all of the people at Rady School of Management, we thank you for joining us today and look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care and bye now.